Good morning. Today is Wednesday, Chai Tevis, I believe, and today we're learning the ninth Perek of Eiruvin. Hashem, only four Mishnayos today. It's a short Perek, not that common in Eiruvin. Today's shiur is the Ilui Nishmas, Aaron Nachum ben Simcha Cohen, and Shul Mordechai ben Shepsel, Rechas Sarah b'Shmuel Leib, and Binyamin Moshe ben Yosef, man, and Hashem will have an aliyah. And for Shleim for Ada Sarbas Leah, Chana Pesel Bas Yenta, Yisrael ben Rachalea, Racha Bas Pesel Zelda, Avram Yitzchak ben Risha, Chaya Bas Doba Bela, for Shleim of Beso Shar Chale Yisrael. Amen. Okay, Perek Test. Perek Test, and tomorrow's Perek Gid, and now we're starting Psachim on Friday, Mr. Shem. Okay. Um, so we discussed previously that the Chachamim answered carrying between a house and a courtyard without an Eruv because it resembles carrying from a Rishus Yachid to Rishus Harabim. There, okay, so there are two elements that make the house appear like a different domain from the courtyard. Number one, that the house is owned by one person or family, whereas the courtyard is owned by others. Number two, the house is used regularly by its occupants, while the courtyard is used by others, which makes the difference in the ownership very obvious. So now we're going to discuss the halachos of carrying between private areas that are owned by different people but not used that regularly. So Mishnah Aleph, Kol Gagos Ha'ir Rishus Achas. All the rooftops of a city um, are considered one rishus, even though the houses beneath them are occupied by different residents. Since the rooftops themselves are not used regularly, they are not considered separate domains from one another. One may therefore carry from one rooftop to another, even without an Eruv. This is assumed. This is applicable when when back in the day the rooftops were flat and they were usable. Nowadays, when the rooftops are angled and they're not really useful, then this doesn't really have any nagias to anything. Um, so the houses themselves are considered to be private, but the rooftops, which connected, were considered public. Um, as long as the one rooftop is not 10 tvachim higher or 10 tvachim lower than the other rooftop. If they are, then it's a special gezerah against carrying between them. This is according to Meir. But according to the Chachamim, they say each roof is a separate rishus because they are treated the same as the houses beneath them. Therefore, just as we may not carry from one house to the other without an Eruv, so too we may not carry from one rooftop to another unless there's an Eruv between the houses. That's according to the Chachamim. Which kind of makes a little bit more sense than what Rabbi said, but not that they need my endorsement. Rabbi Shimon goes a little bit more makel. It goes way more makel, more lenient. And he says, Shimon Omer, Achas, Gagos, Achas, Chatzeros, Achas, Harfefos. That is rooftops, courtyards, and carpets. Remember that a carpet is an enclosure that these are enclosures that are not used as living space. Rishus Achas, they're all considered one domain because they are not used regularly, and one may carry from one to the other even without an Eruv. So what is this regarding? The Kalim should shafsu l'sochem. Only with regard to utensils that began Shabbos inside one of these areas. Below the Kalim should shafsu l'sochem, and not with regards to Kalim, the utensils that began Shabbos in the house. Meaning, if a utensil, if a kli was on the roof or in the courtyard when Shabbos began, it can be carried to any one of to any of these outdoor enclosures. However, if it began Shabbos in a house and was then taken out to one of these outdoor enclosures, even in a mutter way, the person cannot carry that item to another outdoor enclosure unless there's an area between the house and the second enclosure. That's according to Rishon. Mishnah Beis. Um, If there's a large rooftop next to a small rooftop with no area joining them and no wall separating them, and the large rooftop overlaps the small one on both sides, Hagadol Mutter, carrying it in the large rooftop is mutter, because the place where the large rooftop juts out on either side of the small one create a valid partition for the large rooftop. But carrying on the small rooftop is usher because the overlaps are not considered a partition for the small rooftop. Therefore, the small rooftop is considered completely open to the large rooftop, and since the rooftops are not joined in an Eruv, carrying on a small rooftop is usher. If there's a large courtyard that was breached in the wall, that's wall collapsed, so that it now opens to a neighboring small courtyard, and the large courtyard overlaps the small courtyard on both sides of the breach, Gedola Muteris. Carrying in the large courtyard is muter, Oketana Asura, but carrying in the smaller courtyard is aser. Because the breach is at the entranceway of the large courtyard, meaning that the large courtyard has a valid partition separating it from the small one, and a person may therefore carry in the large courtyard. The small courtyard, however, has no partition separating it from the large one. Therefore, just as one may not carry between the large courtyard and the small courtyard, so too it is forbidden to carry in the small courtyard as well. If there's a courtyard that was breached so that it's now open to the public domain, one who carries from the place of the breach, from the place where the wall once stood to a private rishus, or from a private domain to it, chayav is chayav for b'mechalo the malacha of hotzah rishus. This is because the place where the wall once stood is now considered a rishus ha-rabim. This is according to Rabbi Lezer. The Chacham argue, and they say, Chacham omrim mitocha the rishus harabim. One who carries from inside the courtyard to the rishus harabim, or rishus harabim, or from the public domain into it, pater, he's exempt, but he has not violated any din deraisa. There's neishi karmelis because the courtyard is not like a karmelis and not like a rishus hayachid. By the same token, some argue that the place where the wall once stood should also be considered a karmelis and not a rishus harabim. Therefore, one who carries between the place of the wall and a private domain is pater. Mishnah Gimel. If there's a courtyard that was breached during Shabbos, such that it is now open to the Rishus Harabim on both of its sides, and similarly, if there's a house that was breached during Shabbos on two of its sides, along one of its corners, and similarly, if there's an alley whose beams or poles which serve to permit carrying in the alley who were moved during Shabbos, also Shabbos, it remains mutter to carry in all these places for the duration of Shabbos, for Asur and also level, but they are also for future Shabbos. This is according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi disagrees. Rabbi Yossi Omer, he says that the area cannot be that an area can be considered properly enclosed for one Shabbos and not properly enclosed for other Shabbos. Rather, In Mutar also Shabbos, if these places are permitted for the rest of this Shabbos, Mutar Levo, and they must be permitted for future Shabbos as well. Oh, and if they are usher for future Shabbos, soon also Shabbos, they must be then they must be usher for the rest of this Shabbos as well, since it is indeed usher to carry in these places in these places on future Shabbos. It's also usher to the remainder of this Shabbos in which the breach occurred. Obviously, if you get the breach fixed, then the status changes. And Mishnah Dalit, the final Mishnah for this chapter. Habona aliyah al gabish shnei batim. If one builds an upper story on top of two houses that are on opposite sides of Rishus Rabim, so that the upper story now forms the roof over the public domain. And so too, if there are bridges that cross over Rishus Rabim, so that the road underneath the bridge is open on two opposite sides, while being closed on the other two sides by the walls holding up the bridge. Then we can carry underneath them on Shabbos, because these places are now viewed as being surrounded by four walls. The two walls of the houses or of the bridge supports on either side of the Rishus Harabim, and two legal walls that are formed by the sides of the overhead structures extending downward. Rabbi Yehuda, this is the point of Rabbi Yehuda. Chachamim Osrin, but the Chachamim Aser carrying these places because, in their opinion, the sides of the overhead structures do not extend downward to form walls in such a case. But Rabbi Yehuda said further, we can make an Eruv, for an alley that is open at both ends, but has two full walls on the other sides, provided that there is a pole or beam at both open sides. An Eruv for such an alley is sufficient because the two walls alone form a Rishus HaYachid on the Deraisa level. Chachamim Osrin, but the Chachamim Aser carrying in this alley because they hold that the two full walls do not form a Rishus HaYachid on the Deraisa level, and therefore the poles or beams on the open sides of the alley are insufficient. That's all for today. See you tomorrow as we wrap up Maseches Eiruvin. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.